Probably most of you, thank you, Rita, have not read the reading for this week yet. So it's hard for all of you to realize just, I've said this before, and it happens on certain weeks, how deeply in tune with the reading, with Swami Kriyananda really, who writes these commentaries, both the chanters were, whoever chose to sing I Am Om, and then that absolutely perfect whispers that Saranya chose and read, which really tells the story, speaking to God over and over. You are behind, and then listing everything, food, love, words, music. I can't remember the reading. Testing. But, okay, I'm back on. But just that really is what this reading is about. The title of the reading is interesting. How high should we aspire? And when you first read that, you think, well, what would you get up and say about it? Just do a little bit. Don't aspire too high. Don't worry about it. I mean, of course, you want to say, go all the way, give it everything you have. But as Swamiji says here, poor Lakshmi, she's having a worse time with this than I am, I know it. But maybe we'll do a standing mic if it doesn't stop soon. Karen will watch. He's saying, obviously, there's a deeper meaning, a much deeper meaning. And what he's telling us, so let me do the punchline first, and then I'll back up. He's basically saying what we need to aspire to is truth in consciousness, not truth as we see it anywhere in the world, not scientific truths, linear truths that will often limit us, but to aspire to discovering truth from within. Now, I have no idea what was moving Tandava, nor what inspired Saranya to find that, but I do know that when I listen to the words of the song, my heart knows the story, this heart being affected by the lilacs. He doesn't write, a lilac is beautiful because here's its color. It's not that way. Swamiji doesn't grab our minds with that song. What he grabs is our heart. We all fell in love with that lilac because he's sharing with us at the level of consciousness, which is truth. It is our soul reality. It is, in fact, what self-realization is. But it's not where most of the world is. And Swamiji says somewhere, or in some talk, he says it many, many times, in order to understand this reading, in order to understand this truth, and again, I don't mean understand with the mind, but to know it, we all have to learn to think very differently than how we've been taught. Because as he's also pointed out many times, from the instant we're born, the nature of the human condition puts us in a position where we have to learn with our head, where we have to make it in the world. We really do actually have to find food. We actually do have to learn to walk, which is a learning process, or how to relate to people. So we are immediately from the moment of birth brought into an egoic state. And what the reading is about is not living egoically, not trying to compare ourselves or do better than the Pharisees were doing, but rather ask ourselves, is that even really our goal in this life? Do we want to be making better grades? Do we want to be making more money? Do we want to, anything that has to do with I, me? Do we feel that getting more of it, that moving down some linear line, better, undergraduate degree, graduate degree, medical degree, law degree, change of position in jobs, whatever your job is, do we actually think that we will one day get to that point where we feel, now I've attained everything. Now I know pure happiness, pure love, pure contentment. And if we're honest, most of us will say, no, this is not a linear path that we're really on. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's much more of a circular or expansive, ever-expanding path where we find ourselves always at the center and always ready to be able to expand into more until we find ourselves in a place of such perfect love, peace, compassion, truth, that there is no desire, there is no thought. We have come to that place of self-realization, the knowing in body, mind, and soul that we are already in the possession of God's omnipresence. These are Master's words, that we don't need to look for it or work for it, that what we need to be doing in life is improving our awareness of it, remembering that we already have it. This weekend has been a truly powerful weekend for many of us. If you were at all involved in the celebration of Swami Kriyananda's moksha, that final liberation of the soul from the ego. Final, not how probably most of us will leave this body and then get to come back, which is great, and have a chance to get it all right next time or the time after that. But moksha means he got it. He's free. His soul is fully liberated. And Friday night here in this temple, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of his moksha. And I would say that most of the people who were here would express having felt Swamiji's presence in a profound way in this temple, but temples all over the world celebrating Swamiji's moksha would say that. Then yesterday morning, there was a global celebration. It was streamed live. You can still go back and look at it. And what was represented there for a 2-hour period were devotees, mostly people who either met Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda, there's anybody new here who founded Ananda, who really, I was thinking about it this morning, he taught us, any of us who are on this path, any of us who want to teach, share, love fully, just to begin to feel that desire to move towards truth in consciousness. He taught us everything we know. We would never have known this. Many of us came onto this path loving God. Many of us were deeply devoted in some other religion or spiritual path. But I have yet to speak to a person, ever, in all the years that I've been with Ananda, who doesn't say to me that they learned what they know. They understood the teachings. They're able to use them, to live them, because of Swamiji's ability to teach us, which is no small thing. It's hard to talk about these teachings. Swamiji says somewhere, in the West, we've made a God out of science. But he said, really, the saints are the true, I forget the word he used, but basically holders, teachers of religion because of their experience. They've felt it, they know it. And that was Swamiji as well, though he never spoke of himself. Never. That's not hyperbole. He spoke solely about his guru, which is such a sign of greatness. And this is what was expressed yesterday for 2 hours as Jyotishan Devi representing the United States, Anand and Kirtani representing Ananda, what is now called Ananda Europe, and Narayani speaking for Ananda India, to really let us all feel the true global nature of these teachings now, how they really are, as Master Yogananda said they would, spread like wildfire when the time is right. And energetically, the entire universe is coming to that time. The time is right now. Yogananda said, the time for knowing God has come. And listening to those people, one by one, I know some of you listened to it. Viveka Devi mentioned it this morning during the fire ceremony talk that she gave, was so moving. And I wanted to just refer to a couple of things. Now, I'm speaking, I just want to tell you why I'm doing this, because that would be a very hard reading of the Bible to understand. What does that mean? It doesn't even make any sense. He's saying, don't just do better than these people who were not all that great to begin with. And Swamiji, when he was talking about how high do we aspire, I said it, he says it, to knowing truth in consciousness, not in this physical world. So the aspiration itself is for truth. That's big. And he did that this whole life, and he did it enthusiastically, moment by moment. He did it in such a way, the it meaning, writing books, writing music, making movies, giving thousands of talks. Why? So that we could all feel the true nature of what Jesus and Yogananda and other great avatars were trying to share with us, because they love us. So through Swamiji comes this deep meaning. And I just wanted to share a couple of the comments that people made about Swamiji yesterday. Kirtani said that she met a person. Kirtani's one of the spiritual directors of Ananda in Europe. She met a man some years ago who had met, or she met a person who knew the man. That's what she said. But she said this was true, and she would never have said this to the whole world if she didn't know that it was. So this man who knew Yogananda, who used to spend time near him, heard Yogananda say at one point, if Walter, which is what he called Kriyananda, he called Swamiji Walter, if Walter had come sooner, we could have spread light throughout the world. This is an avatar who could see who Swamiji was and who was saying to others, if Walter had come, this was after many devotees had come. And that person who could spread light throughout the world was our teacher, was the person who's saying to us, don't be confused by this. Don't believe everything you've been taught. Your job now is to rearrange what you're supposed to be learning, where you're supposed to be heading. Don't necessarily believe everything you've heard from your teachers, from your professors, from your friends, from your priests, from your rabbis, because religion and the churches mostly, Swamiji's words, by the way, I'm paraphrasing, they get to a point where they're limiting. They want you to follow a direct path, but at some point, if you go further or you could be more expansive, that same church will put a lid on you. They'll put a barrier in your way because they want you to live by their teachings. Saint Teresa herself tried to tell her mentors, her teachers, I need to be still and quiet. When I get quiet, Christ appears. And they would not let her do it. No, you have to recite these prayers. Look at the great saints. You know, you can imagine how embarrassing it was when somebody's been ordained by, I don't know the Catholic Church well enough, but let's say a cardinal. I think they're pretty high up there. Somebody give me a thank you. Or the Pope, or somebody. And then suddenly, you're a student of theirs, but you're having experiences that they can't have. What do they do to those people? Look at St. Joseph of Cupertino, the saint who used to levitate. The church was just embarrassed by him. They weren't willing to say, what is allowing this man to feel and experience a lightness of being beyond his body that draws him up? He couldn't work in the kitchen because he was always floating on the ceiling. These are true stories. A king came to see him from some nearby small country, and he didn't believe this. He didn't believe anybody could levitate. Joseph just took his hand and lifted him up, and he announced to everybody as he was leaving, I'm now a believer. That's what this reading is saying to us. We have to believe more than what we've been taught. And as we believe it, the way that we aspire to that truth is with great enthusiasm, with willingness, with energy. Nobody's actually, God himself is not necessarily expecting us to get it all right and to be perfect in this life. He knows it's hard. He wrote this exam. And most of us are going to make mistakes. We have to be roomy and generous with ourselves. The only thing we need to do is acknowledge the direction that we need to look in. Swamiji said, and Anand quoted him yesterday, so I want to quote him as well. The real conflict in the world today is not about politics or economic systems. Now, he said this a while ago, but as is truth, it can apply again and again and again and again until we are perfectly free. So just look at our world right now. Real conflict in the world is not about politics or economic systems. It is between those who live under, the real conflict is between those who live under the delusion that matter is the ultimate reality and those who understand that underlying truth is consciousness. So he's saying that's the only problem. He told Nayaswami Jyotish once when Jyotish asked him a question, and I don't remember what it was, but it was in essence, how are we to live this life? And Swamiji said the sole purpose of life is to rid ourselves of our ego. And that can be done by deeper, longer, thirsty, guru-given meditation. Now, we all know that's hard. So if we can't sit down and meditate for hours, honestly, the spiritual path, real truth, is directional. Real truth is relative. So as long as we're moving, it's perfect. That's very hard for scientists to get. They want truth to be fixed. They don't want it to be both and. But it's really the way it is. It doesn't matter what people want. So Swamiji used to use that example. I'm saying this right now, to let all of us off the hook of ourselves where we would condemn ourselves for not being good enough. It's relative. We move from where we are, but we keep moving. That's why I'm saying this. So Swamiji used to say, if Mahatma Gandhi or Yogananda suddenly announced to the world they were tired of what they were doing and they wanted to go out and make millions of dollars, every person in the world would think they had fallen from a spiritual height. But if somebody who was lazy and had never had a job said, you know, I'm done with this life, I'm going to start working hard, I want to make a lot of money, every one of us would be cheering them on. Truth is relative. We all have to assess where we are and move towards that state of expanded consciousness. And to do it with the enthusiasm that Swamiji did it, some of the stories, just a couple that Dhyana, Nayaswami Dhyana told, who is the embodiment of enthusiasm and energy. And she told a story, two stories. One is she traveled to Australia with Swamiji in a small group years ago, decades ago. And the experience wasn't like, gee, we should rush to Australia in her mind. So at the end of the trip, Swamiji had this small group together, and he first said, do you folks think that we should start a work in Australia? And Dhyana said, I came forth with, she didn't say a number, but every reason why we should absolutely not start a work in Australia. She said, Swamiji just looked at me, looked away and said, next. I mean, Swamiji would have none of, we can't, we won't. He was smart. We did not actually start a work in Australia, but what he was showing her was that 1, 2, 3, 4, no, 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 no. Her attitude was off. And he ignored it. The other story she told is when she first went to India and the work was first starting there. It started in Gurgaon, and Swamiji was living there. And she said to Swamiji one day, probably a couple years into it, Swamiji, should I stay here or do you think I ought to go back? And he looked at her and he said, look around you. You are needed here. These people all want God. And she just said, so I said to myself, I guess I'm staying. And, it's true. I want to share just a lovely story that I heard last night, and then I'll finish with one more. I was visiting with a friend, and he told me this story about somebody else who's a musician and who is a good musician, though I don't think that was their primary. They weren't going to become a musician. That wouldn't be the only thing they would do in life. But they've played, and they're good. And they've recently started playing Swamiji's music and playing it very well. And they said to this friend of mine just recently, now I see why I studied music. Isn't that beautiful? No, that just brought tears to my eyes. Because when you start having your heart open, when your soul starts feeling its call towards truth, you just go. My heart knows the story. I feel God behind everything I do. God really is the doer, and I am already one. God's omnipresence is our omnipresence. That's really all we need to know. And although we don't get it, we can start reminding ourselves, thank you for giving that talk, Master. Thank you for playing that instrument so beautifully. Even when we still feel me, me, me. Swamiji tells that very cute story of his brother when his brother was 3 years old, and his name was Robert. But at some point, his mother said something about, she was speaking, and she said something about I, or this is mine. And Robert, who was 3 years old, said, no, don't say mine. Don't say I. Mine is Robert. Mine is me. Because we relate to that. Everything's always about I and me. He didn't want his mother. He didn't believe his mother could have anything. But it's all God. I mean, it's actually a very precious story and a very real story for all of us. We're so wrapped up in this sense of I. And it's the only thing that it's like we're blind to truth because we haven't yet thought to open our eyes. And it's right there. But lest we think it's easy or that we can be sloppy or lazy about it, I'll close with this story that Shurjo, who's a center leader in Mumbai, told when he was visiting here. Swamiji gave him a watch one time. Many of you will remember it if you heard it. And he gave him his watch, which was obviously quite a gift. But it was an old, what are they called? You know, you had to wind the watch and set it. They actually existed then. I don't know if they exist anymore. But you pulled a stem out, you set the time, then you had to wind it up. The next day, they went into a CC together, and Swamiji was sitting with him, and he said, Shurjo, what time do you have? So Shurjo looked at his watch, and he said, 10:54, Swamiji. Swamiji said, I have 10:56, set your watch. Shurjo did. And the next day, Swamiji said to Shurjo, what time do you have? 11:58, Swamiji. Swamiji said, and how many seconds? And Shurjo said, 24, 25. Swamiji said, no, my watch is saying 36, 37. Reset your watch. What is the lesson that Swamiji was sharing with Shurjo and with all of us? How high do we aspire? We want to set the watch perfectly. It's second by second. It's not just, the watch is not the story. The dedication, that dedication to doing it right, to listening, to being so open that you could realize this is why I've been studying music. Not any of what I've thought before. Oh, now I see why I was sent, for me, to medical school. Why did I come to Stanford? Why did I have to be in Palo Alto? And on and on. God is the doer. God has the plan. The way we aspire and how high we aspire are opening our eyes, opening our hearts, listen to music, read a Whispers, come here as much as you can. Watch these things when they're on. I told people the other night at this program that we have for Swamiji's Moksha, from the minute I woke up at 4 a.m. on Friday, almost until the Moksha, I watched YouTubes of Swamiji. And I just felt myself from in the morning like, gee, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? Just like this, expanding toward and into his consciousness as much as I was capable. That's what happens with these great souls. Align yourselves with them. Align ourselves with their truth until we can no longer see separation. We no longer see consciousness as solid. That's only because we're living in that dual state. When it comes here, all we will see is God. Imagine that. That's all we'll see in each other, in this universe, in every word, in every song. And it's ours for the taking. Bless you.